the third panel of the Floating Offshore Wind mini-series. I'm Axel Limberg from the German Trade Office Taipei, your today's MC, and I'd like to welcome today Professor Kai-Tung from the National Taiwan University, Mr. Chung-Li, Deputy Director General from Bureau of Energy, Ministry of Economic Affairs, Mr. Yu-Foong Chong, RWE Renewables, Country Manager here in Taiwan, Chou from CSBC Corporation Taiwan, Executive Vice President, and finally Esteban, Sancho, Project Manager from Blue Energy. Following the two previous discussions on the benefits of floating offshore wind for Taiwan, we will have a focus today on the realization of these projects, and I think that's the key topic, how to make it happen, and the requested framework for these projects. I'm very happy to have five experts here with me, very focused on these topics from the university, from the government, and of course from the involved companies. And I'd like to step in with the first question. Who will benefit from offshore or from floating offshore wind in Taiwan? And the major question, when we can expect this technology here in Taiwan? Professor Kai-Tung.
First?
Ask this question just for you.
Okay, I'll try my best. I think everybody will benefit from it, especially the Taiwanese people, the general public. Just imagine that. I would say that I had enough air pollution, so whenever we have clean energy, we should try to go for it. And also, if this energy is already very economically viable, then we should definitely go for it. It's like instead of having black gold, like oil, we're having invisible gold, some kind of very clean, very, it's wind, it's just wind. But now we are at the time, probably going into the next phase, trying to go into the deeper water area. So we have to try out as so-called new technology, floating platforms, So that's the focus of today's discussion. I would say it's not just the developer like Yu-Foong, they are having their business here and trying to generate revenue and profit. Or CSBC, they want to get more steel constructions. They like to have a big ship or big vessels like semi-submersible, TOP or whatever, spar, maybe not. So it's for the entire industry. Yeah. Not only just the representative around this table, but also the entire supply chain, whether it's under the developer or under the manufacturer. You have those small manufacturers supplying components to the big one, and you have service company, you have consulting firms serving the developers. So it's going to be a very healthy, how to put it, healthy push to grow this industry and to get everybody benefit from it. So I would say this is a great opportunity, and I'm really glad that we have this opportunity to talk about it.
And Kai-Tung, most important topic, when? You have a deep foot in oil and gas business, and I think that's the basis for also floating offshore. What is your best guess when we will see the first floating turbine here in Taiwan?
Last year, the end of last year, I was invited to come back to Taiwan and have to give a talk at the Zhongshan University in Kaohsiung. And in my speech, I said that I was hoping in 2 or 3 years we will see our first floating platform in Taiwan Strait. Yep. But I intentionally to say kind of to exaggerate or to speed up my prediction. I would say the reasonable timing would be probably 2-3 years later, because to do a new project, especially a project engaging novel technologies, you need to have a time well placed, so that you have the starting from your front end, starting from your concept development and into your front end engineering, and then going into your detail engineering, then the installation, execution. So that would normally take at least 2 years, at least.
Yeah.
So, personally, well, I'm now a scholar or a teacher. For me, I would like to see it coming faster. Yeah, if we could. But again, coming back to my point, you have to have a nice pace, because if you rush, then you get into trouble. Because you have to look at what kind of infrastructures we have. Do we have enough lifting capacity in Taichung Harbor, or I don't know, Kaohsiung Gang? So there's a lot of issues that we have to look at before we jump into it, dive into it.
Yeah, but jumping, I think that's a right topic for Mike.
Yes.
I would say shipbuilding is very crucial for floating offshore, for offshore overall.
Yes.
What is your best guess?
I think I really appreciate that Katie mentioned about CSBC. We have the advantage because we are shipyard. We have a better facility compared to the others. And for the round-tree zone development, I think the floating type offshore wind farm will be open to the developers. It's a choice. And due to the saturation of the nearshore site, and I think and also the newly started from the Europe, is a very good chance for Taiwan. However, the regulation and how this kind of floating type could be accepted by the government, and as well as the proposal from the developer, is very important. Yeah. And if, as Katie just mentioned, we have to make a very nice pace according to the development of the technology, as well as the infrastructure for the different ports. Yeah. And those conditions, if can be achieved step by step, 2 years, I think maybe too rush. But I hope by 2025, maybe the first platform floating type can be achieved in Taiwan area, and maybe the first one in Asia. And I do looking forward of this kind of opportunity to be happen. And this need the government support, and also the developers' participation and discussion with the local company to see how the supply chain and how the feasibility to make it earlier happen. That will be, I think maybe later we still have many issues. We can finalize the target. Yeah. And that's my comment at this moment.
Okay. Mike, Japan was already the first.
But
no
big area.
A big area?
Yeah. I think maybe 100 megawatts or 300 megawatts.
Oh, okay. Yeah, in terms of pre-commercial.
Yeah.
Moving for what is your opinion would be very interesting. RWU is quite active in developing different types of offshore. What is your view on Taiwan's market? Will we see, let's say, the parallel development of, let's say, the regular offshore wind turbines and floating, or will it be a process that we see floating as a second step?
I certainly hope so. I hope we can see these being developed in parallel, and that's very much going to be down to the regulatory regime, where we've seen countries which have put in place different regimes for different technologies. We've seen both of them prosper. I mean, it was mentioned just before, in Japan, there's a Fukushima Forward. We see many floating demonstrator projects there. Yeah. There are floating demonstrator projects which have been deployed in Europe and upcoming in America. So where the regime permits, it will happen. So this is where I think the government plays a key role, and we see commercial scale, so large scale floating offshore wind events within the next decade worldwide. In Taiwan, I really do hope we can see it before then as well. So you mentioned stepping stones. I think that's important. Jumping into the deep end is going to be very tricky for the supply chain due to the constraints you mentioned. But if deploying smaller projects, that is actually much more possible and viable. And it allows the supply chain, it allows banks, vendors to actually prove to them that the technology can work. And I think it's fair to say, with the fixed bottom technologies, before the first 2 turbines were erected in Taiwan, there was a lot of skepticism and doubt. But as soon as they were made, suddenly everyone's like, oh, we can do this. And then the banks got involved, more developers got involved. And I see that happening worldwide. So I think there's a real chance for Taiwan here.
Esteban, your view from BlueFloat Energy, I think I read you're quite focused on floating technologies. What is your view and expectation here in Taiwan? You just started also your business here.
Yeah, exactly. Well, also like a developer, well, we think something very interesting that we have in floating is that they have some advantage in comparison with bottom fixed. And in terms of the goal that we have in Taiwan of achieving the 15 gigawatts in terms of offshore, floating, they could bring some advantage. For example, we don't need the jackup vessels for installations. We don't need the crews to stay long-term offshore. So I think this could be an advantage to cut some of the bottlenecks that we have right now in the development. So if we want to achieve those 15 gigawatts on time, could be something interesting that the government could take in consideration to accelerate floating in Taiwan. I think actually I would say that floating in Taiwan could happen when Taiwan wants. As we speak right now, companies and countries, they are aligning to make floating possible in many parts of the world. Some examples, we spoke about Japan, but also South Korea. They have a very interesting project called Korea Floating Wind. It's 1 gigawatt, and they want to start to produce energy in 2026, and it's developing right now. We have the Scott Wind lease in Scotland. They expect that 60 to 70% of the projects they're going to be floating. And then we have a specific floating auction in France. Many companies, big companies, they're aligning to make this happening. So I would say that Taiwan, well, we can do it all together if we want. Yeah.
Okay, thank you very much. I think in particular this overview, what happens in the world, was very important. Mr. Li, now coming to the government, I think the government support is also very important to make these things happen. And we learned there is a huge worldwide competition. Here in Taiwan, we started with offshore wind 2018 with the first 2 auctions. Now we're in preparation, or you're in preparation of the 3rd round. So what is your view on floating offshore from the governmental side, and when will it happen? And of course, are there, let's say, substantial lessons learned from the first 2 rounds and the ongoing 3rd round to improve and to make it more quick, more efficient to implement floating technologies?
Yes, thank you. I will share some viewpoints from the government side. Firstly, I'm very glad to share so much experience about the floating wind, and I'm totally agree with the Professor Ma. And everybody will benefit from the floating wind in Taiwan. But something like the developer will benefit from the floating, and the related industry, and the labor department. I think it will increase the job opportunity in Taiwan, and even the environment department, because it's net zero emission electricity come from the wind, and for the energy department, we also get the benefit from the floating wind, because the floating wind is much more strong and consistent. It is very good for the grid system. So I think many departments will get the benefit from the floating offshore wind. But for the government, we are not only think about who will get the benefit from the offshore wind, but we will think about who will be impacted from the floating wind, something like the fish industry, something like the transport industry, something like the cost, the impact of the electricity, all the marine mammals, all the migrant birds. So government have to compromise these 2 issues: who will be benefit, who will be impact, and then decide to how to approach to that target. But for the government, we think when will be realized the floating offshore wind in Taiwan? I think maybe within 5 to 10 years, because maybe within these next 5 years, the government will approve the project. And then in the next 5 years, this project will be commissioned, will be accomplished. So for our position, we think maybe next 5 to 10 years, the floating wind turbine will be practical in Taiwan.
Yeah, but considering what Esteban said, in Europe we see very quick developments, and you are not faced, or you do not see the risks that Taiwan is losing its position as a front runner also here in the APEC region? Because I know RWE, you have been active in Korea, in Japan. We see a lot of developments here in the region, and at the moment Taiwan is in a very
Yes.
good position, I would say.
Yes, we think the floating system, the floating type offshore wind, is not totally mature right now. Right now it's in the pre-commercial stage. So we think maybe we have to wait a few years to see the development in the Europe country. Taiwan is the front runner in the fixed bottom offshore wind. Maybe we will the front runner in the Asia countries, but I don't think we will be the front runner in the whole world. So we learned a lesson from the European countries for the international experienced countries, and then we will learn experience, and then we switch it to Taiwan market.
Mm-hmm. Okay, so cross fingers that everything goes as scheduled. Moving a little bit forward, I think the infrastructure is also a very important point to make these things happen, because you are far away from the, let's say, countryside. Transportation is an issue, grid connection is a hot topic. Mike, what is your opinion? What is essential to, let's say, build up the relevant infrastructure, and is CSBC prepared to work on this?
Okay, for the round 1 and round 2, the fixed type of wind turbine have been chosen. So most of the fabricator, they can transport those foundation, and I think maybe gathering in Taichung area. However, for the floating type, I think that the concept is kind of different, because the fixed type, the turbine will be installed in the wind farm. The floating type, the turbine will be installed at the harbor side. So as the technology goes very fast, the turbine now probably next 2 years will reach about 50 megawatt %. So the floater of this kind of floating type turbine probably will be very big. I would guess the weight of the floater probably will reach 5,000 tons. And each side of the floater, either triangular or square type, probably with 80 meters. And when after launching, we need a lot of pier lengths for accommodate those floaters. And also we need to install those the tower, the nacelle, the blade. So the weight, we need to have a more stable stability, so the draft will be deeper. And considering Kaohsiung Harbor in our company, the draft is only 9 meters. So if they need 12 to 40 meters, still need to be dredging on the harbor side. And that is one issue. And also when installing the tower, the nacelle, the crane probably will reach more than 100 meters. So there comes the second constraint, the flight height. Because most of the harbor is close to the airport. So we need to talk about the flight zone limitation of the height, and also some alternative when the airplane have to land in. We have to discuss with civil aviation administration to resolve this kind of problems. I think this also same for Anping, maybe not for Taichung, maybe not for Taipei, but Kaohsiung is one problem. And because the shipyard have the advantage to provide this floater more economically. And the third one is the floating type need additional store area for the tower, for the nacelle, and for the blade near harbor. It's different from Taichung situation. So more area is also one issue. But when we tow the floater to the wind farm, the auxiliary system like a mooring chain, anchors, buoy, still need a lot of storage place. Right. And that area will be need to locate it near Taichung area. So these three main infrastructure constraint should be solved, I think maybe by the different authority or maybe support from the government, and we can do something.
So it's still challenging for Taiwan to build up the environment and the infrastructure.
Yes, we notice these difficulties, but I think we can find some way and solution and make a schedule to overcome this kind of constraint.
Yeah. And Kai-Tung, may I ask from your perspective, coming also from oil and gas business, what can floating offshore learn from this segment to make it happen? Because I think the technology is quite comparable.
Yes, I was just going to supplement what Mark was saying. For example, number one issue that I can foresee is the lifting capacity of a harbor. And that harbor most likely is going to be Taichung Harbor. Do we have a crane that can lift a nacelle that weigh as much as 600 or 700 tons? Nope, we don't have that yet. And is it easy to build it? You can do it, but it's going to take time. It's not something like you can do it within 1 or 2 months. So that's the number one infrastructure issues that can foresee. And then the next one, well, actually, I'm repeating what Michael was saying, is the entire supply or so-called staging area, storage area. We're talking about a wind farm with maybe 100 floaters, and just imagine the amount of components, parts that you have to store. It's not just the blades or nacelle or the tower. We're talking about a floating system with a mooring system. You have mooring chain, you have a connector, you got shackles, you got the anchors, and these anchors are huge. So can we use Taichung as the staging area? Is that enough? That's a big question mark. Or do we have to use Keelung, or Tainan? So these are the issues that we have to think through. And that's the reason that when you raise the first question, are we going to have a demo or some kind of project, pilot project? Yes, that's something we should try to move toward. So the last point I would like to make is that unfortunately in Taiwan, we didn't have a offshore oil and gas industry. So in terms of the engineering design capability, we don't have much. In the past 2-3 years, we are learning, we're growing, we're learning from the European experience. So we're getting there, but there's a learning curve that we have to climb.
Yeah, I would take it positive to say, okay, it's not an issue for one city, one region in Taiwan. It's an, let's say, really joint approach. Yu-Foong, I just read an article that RWE has signed an MOU with the South Korean city of Ulsan to build up 1.5 gigawatt floating offshore technology. This means you're quite advanced and you have a plan how to do it. So what are your ideas to Taiwan, your proposals, how to make it happen here?
I think I think it was touched upon in the first question, which is there's a global race going on. There are developments going internationally, and we are active as a company all over the world, including the Asia-Pacific region. I think here, Taiwan, it needs to be brave. It needs to take advantage of the innovations and the learnings, as you mentioned, from Europe. We don't need to start from square one. We can deploy technologies which have already been proven, and I think the key reason why there's race, in my mind, it's all about technology clusters. Where technologies get deployed, the entire supply chain follows, from manufacturers to academics to consultancies and developers. And once they're there in country, it grows and grows and grows and becomes a natural cluster, regionally for the region. And we've seen that for fixed bottom here in Taiwan. I mean, you mentioned it's a shame there's no oil and gas sector here in Taiwan, but actually there is. A lot of the oil and gas, a lot of the offshore wind experts who are here deploying fixed bottom have come from the oil and gas sector. So actually that technology is coming via parallel technologies. So I think there's still the opportunity. I think Taiwan can be a leader in floating in the same way it's been in fixed bottom.
Yeah. Do you think, I think we are not thinking about Taiwan, Korea, Japan. at the end of the day, it's a regional issue here in the APAC region. What is your opinion? Do you think we will see more hubs or regional hubs, or will we see one strong regional hub on floating offshore technology, and it's now the chance for the different countries, regions to fix it and to get this position? Kai-Tung.
This is
academic at the
okay. So I guess yeah.
I'm partial about this.
So I can speak freely because I'm from academia. No, it's really tough to answer this question because there has been a strong competition among the three countries, South Korea, Japan, and Taiwan, in many different industries. So this is gonna be the next one, and I do see that Taiwan is in a position that looks pretty good because we have had a really strong shipbuilding industry. Not only that, we have done in the past 3-4 years all the fixed button floating wind turbines, and for that part we were ahead. So, but coming back to the fundamental questions, the competition is going to be really tough. Japan and South Korea, they both announced that they're going to have deep water wind development. So time is going to be a critical issue. So it's just like a racing. We don't want to have our starting point too far behind. We want to make sure that we are starting. So I guess that will be the key.
Yeah. Okay. Esteban, you created your regional hub here from BlueFloat Energy in Taiwan. Is that a strong signal you believe on Taiwan, or it is the first market?
Well, as a developer, I mean, we believe in Taiwan as in other parts of the world. We're developing internationally. I would like to bring the question to the port infrastructure. I think we are all quite aligned here with Mike and with Katie and the rest of the panel. Port infrastructure is critical for offshore wind development, and especially for floating, because most of the assembly is onshore. And actually, we avoid many of the complex operations and the higher risk that we have with jackup vessels in offshore. For floating offshore, I will repeat a little bit, but in the ports we will require specific characteristics. One of them we have talked already is about the space that we need for storage of the components, a lot of very heavy components. Also the assembly area, we need a space for that. We also need the deep draft berth for the floaters. We need also very big heavy duty cranes. We spoke about this, and I would say that especially important for us as a developer would be the draft berth, the bearing capacity of the port, and also the storage of the components. And why? Because these three characteristics, they will determine the floating technology that we are going to use. To give you an example, in general lines for a 500 megawatt floating project, we will need a minimum draft berth of 12 meters and a bearing capacity of between 10 and 15 tons for components storage, and for assembly up to 50 tons of bearing capacity. And for the storage of the components, between 15 and 20,000 square meters of storage. Ideally, we will see that manufacturing and the assembly happen at the same port. We have here the big question mark about Taichung Kaohsiung, but we have seen in the industry a different approach, a more collaborative approach. I will give you a couple of examples. We have the WindFloat Atlantic out of the coast of Portugal. The floaters, they were manufactured between Portugal and Spain, but the turbines, they were assembled in Spain, and now the project is generating grid power out of the coast of Portugal. The second project is the Kincardine project, very famous here in Scotland. It's right now generating power in Aberdeen, but it was the floaters, they were built in Spain, and the turbines, they were assembled in Rotterdam in the Netherlands, and now it's in Scotland. I would say that for Taiwan, we can use this collaborative model between different ports. We really believe that we have the characteristics for a demo project. But for commercial projects, we need to include these characteristics and these needs for floating into a general plan. And we know that right now the government is working with the port authorities to upgrade the port, so it's a fantastic opportunity.
Yeah. So to consider or to sum it up at this moment, I think we will see offshore or floating offshore wind here in Taiwan in any case. So the main question is, how should it happen? Is the best way to go via a pilot or demo project like it happened for the ground-mounted offshore, or should we start with an, let's say, really enlarged commercial project to, let's say, use the commercial interest also behind? Mike, what is your position? You mentioned the difficulties or the challenges for the infrastructure.
That's for sure, because and this is a newly started technology in Europe, and as also KT and Yu-Foong mentioned, the timing is really important. And for the fixed type, I think the technology is very mature in Europe. So for round 1 and round 2, when those developers introduce the technology here, and actually the localization part and the percentage is not so high, and the local companies actually didn't profit or even benefit from these content. However, for the floating type, I think we have the resources, research resources, and also some bridging with engineering capacity. We also have some expertise coming from different countries that have the oil and gas experience. So I think this is a kind of chance for Taiwan to step ahead. And even though we know some constraints or problems, or even the environment impact assessment beforehand, but we still have to step out and to win the floating business in Asia area that I suggest.
Yeah. Okay. Before going to Mr. Leaf to ask for, let's say, what is the governmental perspective, Yu-Foong, coming from the industry, from the developers? What is your experience? Is it better to start really with a commercial project or to have smaller demo or pilot projects?
I think not just for Taiwan, but worldwide, the stepping stone approach is sensible. Commercial projects will come, but before then, I think we need to prove to the industry, prove to local stakeholders and banks that actually this project can be delivered, and also be delivered in a cost-effective manner. Ultimately, offshore wind, floating wind needs to benefit the public and needs to supply green, reliable, and cost-effective electricity to allow that transition away from nuclear and coal. A pre-commercial project of scale offers the ability to do this. And with the technologies, I think there are already enough small demonstrator single units to prove the technology works. It's using technology which is decades old from the oil and gas sector.
Yeah.
It's proven. Now I think the challenge is to prove it can be done with a moderate scale. And by doing a moderate scale project, I mean, say for example, 100 megawatts, you have several turbines, not too many, but enough so that it allows costs down in the supply chain. It allows the supply chain to get orders where it's not so large that it's actually a daunting order to fulfill, but actually large enough to make it worthwhile to make that first investment. Then we see the cost coming down and it proves actually, and then we can see that trajectory. So then the next stage are the commercial projects which can be cost competitive.
Okay, so from your perspective, let's say small scale commercial project makes sense to test the supply chain and not the technology.
And I think it's also, at that stage it is still pre-commercial because there's limited scale, it will still need support and subsidy, but that for a few projects, and then that enables then commercial next step.
Mr. Lee, so the questions are raised and everybody's looking to the government here. What are the plans, or are there any, let's say, written plans now from DOE in particular?
Yes, if we want to develop the floating offshore wind type in Taiwan, the first important thing, the most important thing is to enhance our infrastructure. Just as mentioned before, we have to enhance our port and harbor. And right now, a lot of fixed bottom offshore wind project in Taiwan, they compete with the port and harbor already. So if we want to promote much more floating type, they compete more seriously to get the land or get the harbor or the port. So we have to prepare about this infrastructure. So we have to talk to the transportation department already. Right now they are organized it. And at the same time, right now we are thinking about maybe in the future we'll draft a demo project to set for the floating wind. Right now in Taiwan, we don't have any restriction to the type of the wind turbine. You can set the floating type or fixed type. But in that kind of situation, the floating type is very difficult to compete with the fixed bottom wind turbine because the cost is still high. So right now we are just evaluate the feasibility to set a pilot or a demo project only for the floating type. So we are just study about this. So we'll do this by the two ways. The first, we will do the special project for the floating type. Another, we will enhance our infrastructure. I think when everything is mature, we will start to open the market to accept the floating type wind turbine. But right now, we are not restrict any type of the wind turbine.
Yeah, but you mentioned again the infrastructure, in particular the harbor.
Yes.
Is it possible that we are here in I would say in a trap because we have in Taiwan a very strong fishing industry. We have shipbuilding. We need LNG terminals. We have cargo ships coming here. We have offshore, which is built and should be operated later on. We have floating. Do we have overall sufficient harbor capacity here in Taiwan?
Yes. So that's our barrier or our challenge to do it. And another very important thing is how to build the trustful relation between the groups or the local communities. Right now, when the government have the big construction project in Taiwan, many people have the different opinions about it. So how to build the trustful relationship with the industry or with the local community is also very important in Taiwan.
Axel, can I supplement to Li Fu Xizang? So I only came back to Taiwan a few months ago, and I had the opportunities to travel and to look around the West Coast, all different harbors. And I was surprised because in my understanding, before I came back, I always thought that Kaohsiung Harbor is the only one, or Taichung is probably the only two. No, there's a Xingda Harbor. There's also a Anping Harbor, and we also have Keelung Harbor. All these can provide land storage space. So to answer your question precisely, I think there's quite a bit of space that hasn't been utilized yet. So I think there's a room. There's definitely opportunity for us to get ready.
Yeah. So the capacity is there, but it has to build up. One question, which is very, let's say, relevant also for the current offshore development, is always localization. What is the role of localization and what are the chances and how should it be managed? Because based on my knowledge and the discussions with the stakeholders in the regular offshore business, that's quite challenging. And the question is Taiwan operating on a standalone basis, or is it part of an international supply chain and project team and can gain profits? So what is your view on localization also for floating offshore?
Okay, I totally understand there are a lot of debate about the localization policy. But for the Taiwan government's view, if we want to create something in Taiwan, we have to do it benefit each other, not the single benefit. So our policy is we want to benefit the developer and benefit the local industry. So if everybody can get a slice of a pie of this project, I think it will go much more smoothly. But I have to say we have to do the localization policy very, very carefully. we cannot overestimate the local industry's capacity or underestimate their capacity. We have to do it much more practical, what we can do and what we cannot. And in this phase, we endorse some flexibility mechanism in the localization systems. So some items you can choose. If you choose more, maybe you will get the high score and you get much more opportunity to get the consent of the government. So we will make this mechanism much more practical and much more flexible.
Mike, CSBC is part of the Taiwanese industry and environment. You're an integrated part of the supply chains. What is your view on the localization topic?
I think the localization is always important when the government kick off a major investment or policy. And I would take Taiwan's indigenous defense program as example. And for Taiwan's Navy, when they want to build a frigate or maybe different kind of vessel, they will need a different variety of equipment and system. And in order to get those equipment ready, and we had to make a survey of the capacity of the local company who can provide the component or equipment or system. And when we find there are some gap, and we need to find some solution. And this kind of government localization regulation, then we can encourage the foreign company to provide the technology here and cooperate with our local company. And in order to fill up all the gap or the lost part of the equipment system. And I think this kind of will be a win-win situation for local company and also for the international company, and to build up all the technology here. And I think for floating wind farm, the methodology is all the same, but actually the localization in the beginning will be more expensive. It will cost more money. But in the end, we will save, not only locally and also international company, they can expand the supply chain locally in Taiwan. And I think that a different kind of a situation and time scale and time frame, the localization and methodology should be altogether considered. That's what the Navy's program we got the experience before. I think can be introduced to the floating industry.
Yes. Okay. Esteban, moving to you as an international project developer, localization, is that an issue for you to build up, let's say, different supply chains on different spots, or would it be helpful to say, okay, we have one supply chain worldwide for all of our projects?
Well, regarding localization, I'm going to focus on Taiwan, and I have some good news. So it's expected that around 60 to 70% of the supply chain using bottom fix can be used in floating. So that's good news for the commercialization of floating in Taiwan. But however, we have been looking at the localization policy, and it's a very good initiative to make Taiwan a very good hub in offshore wind, and also to make it a top reference in the world. But it's very bottom fix oriented. We analyze the different items, and especially for the bonus items, we calculate around 15 points out of 100. They couldn't be achieved if we present a floating project. So this will discourage any developer like ourselves to present a floating project, and also the industry to invest and to put a development on this. No, we actually have some ideas of localization that we could work here in Taiwan. The first one is the mooring and anchoring systems. We believe at this current moment we could have 10% of the systems localized in Taiwan. Especially the manufacturing of the anchors and piles, but there is critical items like the mooring lines. We haven't identified sufficient capacity in Taiwan, and even in the region we have Singapore, we have Japan, South Korea, and they have capacity, but it's limited, and they are also doing their own projects. So this is something that we have to address very early. And the second one is the dynamic cables accessories. This is something that we can localize in Taiwan very easily because they are small devices and they present a low cost of implementation. So this could be some ideas. And again, the localization plan, they will need to think of floating and include items. And especially if you want to see floating projects in the next auctions, we need to be competitive in a way, no? Not only in the cost, but also in terms of winning the project, having an opportunity.
How about the floater? Do you think is any
This one?
chance to
The floater, well, that's a good question. for Mike, yeah.
We can work together.
Yeah, exactly.
Yu-Foong, also RWE's experience worldwide active in building up supply chains projects. Localization, is that a hot topic here in Taiwan?
Yeah, it's naturally a hot topic.
Yeah.
I mean, I think energy policy in here, in Taiwan and in every country, it needs to be successful to fulfill energy security needs. It also needs to meet economic goals as well. So it needs to be successful for the local economy. This could be supply chain directly feeding into offshore wind, but also it also needs to balance price as well, because ultimately I think the goal of government is for green energy to supply other industries such as semiconductors. So therefore, it's a balance between the quality, the localization, and the price here. So we need to get this balance right. And I think what you mentioned just now, Mike, is really important. There's local sourcing, but supplemented by international sourcing as well. There are good technologies, good lessons learned, and if it can be done much more effectively in cost, better quality and cost by people who've already started, then let's use that, but then focus on Taiwan's strengths, things which makes more sense to do here in Taiwan. So where it can then not just deliver for the Taiwan floating industry, but also for the regional floating industry. So there Taiwan becomes a pioneer and I think leads the industry. It doesn't have to lead in everything, but leads in key areas where it can be a natural leader. And then that cluster then forms around those components, because you mentioned earlier before, Katie, that this sector, I mean, there are hundreds of companies, thousands of different jobs and different specializations. It's not just engineering. There's lots of different skill sets involved, from developers to EPCIs to consultancy. So yeah, I think there's a lot of opportunity here.
So meaning being focused on some specific technologies, some parts, and then move it out, becoming part of the worldwide supply chain.
And I think the flexibility you talked about is key, because it is very difficult for any government to predict what exactly is going to be. But actually that flexibility is what allows areas which are naturally competitive to form. I think Taiwan has brilliant potential. I mean, it has the skills, brilliant engineers. It's got the entire supply chain here already. It's got the right conditions for offshore wind. I mean, that's why the industry is here. And I think it's just the next step, and then it can really take off.
Yeah, Katie, what is your view on localization?
Yeah,
I think that's the academic view.
I was just going to volunteer to speak up because I heard something that I kind of disagree on. For localization, think about this. We are moving from fixed bottom turbines to floating, right? Fixed bottom, Taiwan really have no experience, no infrastructure, nothing. So we have to learn. We have to use the foreign technology. We have to use their experience. We have no choice. So the localization, I think the government is doing a great job. I've been watching the news, setting a threshold there. You have to meet it, right? Going to the next step, going to the floating, I think we need to raise that threshold instead of lower it. The reason is floating is basically designing floating vessels. That's shipbuilding. We have it. Do we have the facility? We do. We have a big shipyard. We have many small yards. And in terms of human resource, do we have the talents? Oh yeah, we have how many? 5 university, outputting very high quality students. And we also have quite a few consulting firms, engineering firms that can do the design. I'm actually helping SOIC, 传播中心, working on this concept design project. We have pretty much everything that the developers need. So moving into floating, I personally really believe that we need to raise the bar, even.
But going back to the basic of floating, my understanding of the discussion is it's, let's say, we have a strong overlapping between fixed offshore and floating offshore. We have oil and gas business, the experience. If you should, or can you mention the ratio? Okay, what is new, what is offshore, what is oil and gas? When I take these three pillars for floating offshore.
Me or?
Yeah, starting with you.
Okay. The oil and gas industry has been there for over 40 years. So there's tons of experience being built up. And there are a lot of mistakes being made. Oh, if you Google it, all kind of failures, all kind of catastrophes. Oh yeah, there's always even a movie made. I think I watched it. Oh, I love it. Because I remember the days I was offshore doing the installation work. That movie was very nice.
No nightmares.
I mean, yeah, it's a bad story. It's a sad story. Okay. So what I'm trying to say is that we need to learn from the oil and gas industry. There's so much lessons learned we can grab, and I believe we are doing that. Most of the developers or the design houses, they are using not only the lessons learned, but they are trying to hire, or I don't know, I don't want to use the word steal, and trying to get talents from the oil and gas industry, especially during the downturn, like in the past 2 or 3 years when the oil price was down. So that's actually a very healthy thing. You know, you want to get the experience from the other industry and make the best use of it. I think personally, Taiwan is still on a learning curve, just starting. So there's so much things we need to do. So for what we are doing today here is one thing that we're trying to make it better, you know. So I also like to work with all the panelists here. I can share because I can proudly say that I work in the oil and gas industry for many years. And so I just came back to Taiwan a few months ago. So we need to get all the experts together and trying to contribute, trying to just bring their knowledge and experience to the table and share with everyone.
I'd like to add one point. You mentioned just now that lessons learned from oil and gas and their accents. There are accents, and I think here what's important for this first stage is confidence in the industry. And for that we need successors. So making sure it's a fine balance to build up the local industry, but also to make sure we use international experience to ensure that the first projects which go in create that confidence, and then the banks are willing to then, the industries, the supply chain is willing to invest in more. So yeah, let's get it right. Let's make this one a success.
Yeah. So the main question is, I'm not decided yet. Taking oil and gas business, what is the better solution to say? What is on the market, buy it, and stepping into localization and make it where we need new skills and where we have a profound basis here in Taiwan? Or what is the best solution, Mike?
I think maybe not a new skill. For the turbine itself, it's an existing skill. Just need to consider the ship motion coupling with the control system. So needs some improvement for the electrical propulsion part. But for the floater, I think also Katie Ma mentioned, floater have to be mooring at the sea bottom. And that kind of technology already mature and have many lessons learned. We can increase the mooring chain, we can increase the safety factor, even can sustain the typhoon through the, I think maybe numerical calculation analysis. But this kind of technology, I think in Europe, they have a demonstration site already, maybe 30 megawatts, 50 megawatts. In Taiwan, I think for the round 3, we have the zone development area already dedicated to some certain area. And maybe I think for the developer, they can have a dual platform there. Maybe 90% is fixed type, 10% for floating type, for like a pilot project for each developer to make sure that they can cooperate with the local company. and compete each other and make sure that the technology can be implemented in Taiwan and we can altogether step outside to the world. I think that will be very important. We don't have to worry about technology. I maybe have to back up from KT.
I think the technology is there. It's there already. No matter whether it's semi-submersible, TOP, spar, or even barge, they're out there. I can tell you that there are around 400 floating production units floating on the ocean around the world. Those are for oil and gas production. So they're out there, and they're even bigger. We're talking about a huge semi-submersible, not the kind of So for wind turbines, you compare them, it's actually smaller. So technology is already out there. It's really how you learn from the mistakes that we learned, in the past 40 years. That's the key.
That's I understand. Time is ticking. Moving again from, let's say, the realization, we need also the environment, and part of the environment and a very important stakeholder is the government, Bureau of Energy. Mr. Lee, how can government help to make it happen, to speed it up, and to create really a reliable, stable environment for the project developers, for the companies to step in the market here?
Yes, I think the government will play a very important role in this field. And the most important thing is to build up or to create a floating wind friendly environment. What I mean the friendly environment is something like the infrastructure or the legal system. Right now, because we don't have any experience on the offshore, especially the deep waters, so we have to amend our legal system to fit with this kind of the infrastructure. And the government will play a very important role. And just I mentioned before, right now we study the feasibility to set a pilot or a demo project just for the floating wind.
Okay. Esteban, from commercial side, what is on your wish list to the government? How can the government support your activities here?
I have a very long. I didn't bring here, but I agree with
Christmas.
That's my Christmas.
Please.
But I agree with Mr. Lee. It's very crucial to create a regulatory framework from the government. But the government, they need to understand. So I think it's very important to work with developers and with the supply chain, and to understand what is, for example, potential bottlenecks, and to understand also what can we do to mitigate them, to create the strategies and policies. Again, I will speak about the anchoring and mooring, and also the dynamic cables. This is important to think about this now, if we want to have floating in 5-10 years, or when the government is planning to.
Okay.
2 or 5, not
2 or 5.
Yeah, that's what I want.
Mike, you want to speed up the process? What is on your wish list?
I think speed up.
Speed up.
As soon as possible. I think the first project, maybe pilot or maybe pre-commercial, up to 1 megawatts from different developers can be realized by 2025 or 2026. And make some example for all the other international world wind farm area. And make Taiwan another big mountain chain, Hubos and San.
Yu-Foong and on RWE's list?
I think what would be really helpful is, I think you know the plan, so once that comes out, a clear roadmap, what the ambition is and what the next steps are. And you mentioned the regulatory framework. Within there 4 pre-commercial demonstrator projects, ones which are of sufficient scale to allow these costs to come down. And that then also with the government subsidy and support to enable that happen. And then I think working together, it's going to be collaborative. There's input from the government, from developers, from the supply chain, and also local stakeholders as well, local government, local fisheries. Everyone, that's really paramount to get that buy-in and acceptance, because it's an industry for everyone.
KT, you from university side, from the academic side, how can government support these activities?
I think the government is already doing a great job. I have to say that that was actually to my surprise. Imagine that, because I came back to Taiwan, but Before that, I've been watching TV news, and I noticed that sometimes I attend some of the technical forum, some of the meetings. I've seen Yu Zhang's speech, and so the tone was very positive, and I love it. You know, that's what the government official should do. If they pronounce a very positive tone, you know, the developer will have the face, will gain the face. The policy will have to come, you know, sooner or later. But if the official can come out and say that, yes, that's what we want to do. You know, we are moving into deeper water. We are allowing all the developers to do floating wind. Yeah. That statement is gonna, you know, boost up all the confidence.
Yeah. Okay. Thank you very much. Time is ticking. I think, Mr. Li, we filled your bag with the wishes from the industry. So it's a long working list. And I have to say thank you very much to Mike, to Esteban, to KT, Yu-Foong, Mr. Li, for being here. It was a very great discussion. I learned today floating offshore wind is possible. It's a project for the complete society and industry. So everybody should benefit from it. Time is ticking, and the infrastructure is a quite important part to allow and to create the basis to make it happen here in Taiwan, but we are on a good way. The government is supportive, the companies are willing to cooperate, to work with Taiwan, to invest here. The trust in the market in Taiwan is there. So I'm looking forward to the next steps, and hopefully we can see the first floating wind turbine quite soon on the Taiwan Street. Generating energy. I'd like to sum it up to say thank you very much to all of you. I'd like to thank also to our partners, the Netherlands Trade Office, the British Trade Office, the Trade Council of Denmark, and Invest Denmark, the supporting partners, the sponsors of this activity. And it was a great pleasure for me from German Trade Office Taipei to be your MC today. It was a very fruitful discussion. Thank you very much. Looking forward to see you soon.
Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, Axel.
Thank you.